Well, hi everyone. Welcome back to RTI Speed Tips with Bob and Chad. We apologize we had to miss last week. Hope everybody joins us tonight. We've got pretty much an open forum, so any of the questions that you might have, we're free for all kinds of questions. We don't have a specific direction that we need to go tonight. I do want to talk a little bit about some Panhard bar stuff and some trailing arm angle stuff that we've been noticing, things like that. So it's going to be wide open, whatever you guys want. We've got Chad here who can answer all your information about his products, and we'll go from there. So how's it going, Chad?
Going pretty good. Yeah, we had a pretty good day today. We were pretty busy. Had a fun couple weeks. We went to had my dad's race last Wednesday at the asphalt track here, so that was a pretty fun night. Had a bunch of people out there, old time racers and friends of his, and had all my employees out there. So that was a really good night. The Colin Refner won the overall there of the best finish in both features, so that was fun. And then last Friday I went back to Fountain City again, working on a few new things there. So it was a pretty fun week.
Now, let's give the listeners a little bit of history and a little bit of background of your dad and what he did and kind of the beginning and why they had this tribute to him.
So yeah, my family owned the Dells Motor Speedway and operated the track here locally in West Salem, which is the town that I actually live in. So I grew up at the racetrack. My dad was a promoter for 17, 18 years roughly, 2 asphalt tracks. And so I grew up popping popcorn and picking up the trash at the racetracks as a kid back in the day when, Dick Trickle and Mark Martin and Joe Shear and all them hot dogs were racing. Short track racing was alive and well then, and it's still alive and well, but it was a special time back then. A lot different than it is today. Them guys were racing 5-6 nights a week, so it's pretty cool. But so my dad was pretty instrumental in getting the passion instilled in me for being involved in the racing industry, and that when he was the promoter of the CWRA, which is the Central Wisconsin Racing Association, is who he had for his touring series or whatnot, the overall points champion, if you will, sanctioning body as they are today. So they wanted to have a tribute race. It was a good time. Had a lot of fun. Had a lot of old time racers there, bench racing with the old boys. So it was a good night.
Well, that sounds like a cool event. I got to watch a lot of those guys race back then. Never actually got to know your dad up until a couple of years ago. Spent a little bit of time with him up there at 141, and looks like he was enjoying himself that night because there was a few good old boys that were there that were pavement guys that I actually even recognized, and so that's pretty cool. Well, I'm glad they had that. That sounds like a neat event.
Yeah.
What else is new? Any projects or anything you want to tell us about?
Well, we're thrashing. We're doing our expansion in the manufacturing building over town, so we're busy with that project. And we actually had our engineer here today working on all of our 2021 cool products that we're getting ready to release. We're going to make some changes to the load machines and working on we'll call it our Gen 3 machine. It's gonna be pretty neat. I thought we had them as good as we could get them, and then you always have ideas, or this racer wants to do that and that racer wants to do that, and it kind of gets our juices flowing. And I go to the engineer and say, hey, is this even possible? And he says, yeah, this is possible. So he was here all day today. We were working on that new stuff, and we're really, really excited about the future of the Ultra Force side with the technology and tools and the cool stuff that we can do there on that side of the business.
Well, it's going to be really exciting. We've been unbelievably busy here at the shop. We had a stub job last week, and we sold a new car that we just got sent out on Saturday, and we've got another new car that we're working on today. And Rocky was doing some body work, and Bobby was working on some shocks. I think he was doing some Penske's and some JRIs today, and so we've been unbelievably busy here too, and it's kind of surprising as far as business wise and stuff. Our numbers actually are up for the year, and we went through that whole COVID thing, so it goes to show racing is still strong, and I'm just really excited about it. Looking forward to the Harris Clash. Once again, August 4th. That's going to be a lot of fun. Chad sponsoring the Race of Champions race, and I know that even Austin Arneson called us today to make sure to let us know that he was going to be there and be in that race, and so
Cool.
it's pretty exciting. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Well, I
go ahead.
talked to Cole today. To Cole. He called me and told me that he'd sell me tickets again. So we're planning on bringing the fan bus.
The bus.
Yeah, my employees and friends, and so it'll be a good night. I can't wait. We were actually cutting the trophies today in the machine shop, so they're gonna be badass.
Awesome. Well, our first question, Richard's got the question about the adjustable left rear chain limiter. What conditions should cause you to tighten or loosen it? Well, in my opinion, when you're loosening or tightening the chain, what you're really adjusting is you're trying to adjust roll steer, and you're trying to adjust how much bar angle you get in that left rear bar. So as a rule of thumb, a lot of times, if you need more steer, you'll let some chain out of it, like on the racetrack super heavy and you need to go real fast and make the car turn a little better. And then sometimes, on the slicker racetracks, you will maybe tighten that chain up a little bit so that it doesn't have quite so much angle. Now, I've seen guys do exactly the opposite of that. So it kind of depends on the driver and the driver feel. Once again, that chain is a little more indicative to the fact of what the driver likes and how much height the driver likes for his style and the way he drives the car. What's your opinion, Chad?
I think that's pretty close. We tend to shorten it when the track is really heavy, just because you don't need all the motion in the car also. So it kind of also depends on how they drive the race car, like you said, if they're a throttle masher or not a throttle masher, but that's pretty much spot on there.
John's got a question. One of our most noticeable changes I've made on my Superstock is moving the panhard bar up on the rear end to loosen it on throttle, as advised by a fellow racer. I just want to know why it works that way. Well, what you're doing when you change the panhard bar, guys, you got to remember you're changing your roll center in the rear of your car. So if you raise the panhard bar up on the rear end, you're actually raising the roll center. When you raise the roll center in the car, it actually rolls less. When you lower the roll center, it causes the car to roll a little bit more. And the other thing is and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the other thing is the angle. Some guys have started to get real crazy with the angle of the J-bar, which the problem with that runs in, or the panhard bar, I mean, the problem that you run into when you have all that angle in there is, of course, the rear end will move to the right or move to the left a little bit more. So that in turn tightens it up. But when you raise it on the frame, you're also raising the roll center. So I've always used that kind of a simple rule of thumb just for me to kind of understand. I've always drawn an imaginary line between the top of the left rear tire and the bottom of the right rear tire. Then I draw another line where my panhard bar mount on the frame is compared to where it is there, and where those lines intersect, that's not actually the roll center, but it's a way I can understand it. So when I do move the bar one way or the other, I can see if it's moving it to the right or to the left, or if it's moving it up or down. So That's what it actually is doing. It's definitely moving that up will free the car up. And the thing people forget about a lot of times is our horsepower. Some of those limited classes have limited horsepower, and if you get the car hooked too hard, you're killing the horsepower. You're killing your mid-corner straightaway or your mid-corner speed, which is killing all your momentum. And when you're running with limited horsepower, you have to have momentum. That's the big key. Tyler's got a question. He says, you guys commonly reference the chassis manufacturer about load numbers, etc. What if the chassis manufacturer is no longer in business and you have an older chassis? How do you get this information without 6 months worth of testing?
Well, you have to remember that your load stick is your data collection device for your notebook. So, I mean, just because you have a chassis builder that is no longer in business doesn't mean you can't reference anything. You could take some measurements off if you got a good buddy, next to you and get some numbers from him, but then take some measurements of the shock mount locations and see how drastically different they are. But it's more about putting that stick on your chassis and, getting the number of your scaled ride height number, and then taking the stick and compressing the right front down to where your magic marker on your shock shaft tells you you're running on the speedway. Then put the load stick on there and get that number. And you write that in the book. You're building the baseline. So if you race at 2 different speedways, you get both them numbers from them speedways, and then you have to analyze it. And you'll be a lot better off just staying in your notebook anyway. You're using that stick to change springs accurately and adjust your car, on the down number based instead of the ride height number. So I don't think you're at a disadvantage by having a car builder that's no longer around. You just have to take that tool and use it and build your own data and your own notebook worth of, information from each racetrack that you go to. So that's pretty much how I would address that. If you don't have any numbers, you need to start your own notebook and build your own database.
Well, and the thing about that is, too, like Chad said, build your own notebook. But you're going to find if, say for some reason or another, the race car is working good, but you put 2 turns in the right front and it made it work better. Now you get your load stick out, go through that same process, and now you have XYZ load number. And so you go, well, at that racetrack, that was awesome. So it follows up just exactly what Chad just said. Write this in your notebook, because now when we go back here, there's another special coming up in a month, and we're going to be back here. Write these numbers down and record the conditions of the racetrack and that stuff, because then you can go duplicate it. I mean, you watch those races on TV. Like I watched the NASCAR race on Sunday, a little bit of it, and that's one of those things you hear the crew chiefs are always talking about. Well, we have a notebook for this place, but it was under these conditions and blah blah blah, and so that's how that notebook is so handy, and that machine. You'll learn so much with it, and just don't let it confuse you, because it's not confusing. It's just a way to give you data that you can reference for the future. Ben's got a question. It seems like every week you get asked the same question in a different way. Ben, do you really believe that? Okay, I'll believe you. What do you think is a critical adjustment that is not asked often or you missing on an IMCA modified? Oh, wow. Well, I don't know if there's one actual adjustment. What would you go with?
Well, that's the beauty of racing 4-link race cars, is the adjustment list is extremely long. So, man, I don't know. That's a whole can of worms. Where do you want to start? So I don't know what to say there.
To be honest with you, and I'm not a huge fan of making large adjustments on the Panhard bar or the J bar. But like with the new Wehrs climber brackets and the way that is, now we can make adjustments that are minute. You can go one click. Say, for example, the racetrack you start out with your pinion plate at 0, and the car's pretty good in the heat race. But by history that this racetrack is going to be slick, 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 slick. So, if I was going to just make one adjustment, I'd probably drop that J bar on the pinion, or the Panhard bar on a sport mod. I'd probably drop it 1 click. Now, I sure wouldn't go no inch, because I think that's a lot. Now, I've heard guys going an inch.
I had a classic case Friday night, Bob. I was at Fountain City, and I was helping my buddy on a crate late model, and I was watching him, and I watched him go in the corner, and just past entry, it looked like he was real tight, like he had to turn a second time. I said, "You're rolling tight," and out of the throttle, rolling to the middle before you pick up the fuel, rolling tight. I generally go to the Panhard bar. So he had a Panhard bar that was on the car that was not a climber, and it was about 1.25 inches between holes. So he went.
Oh,
I said, that's a pretty big adjustment, but let's give it a shot. So he raised her 1.25 inches or whatever them holes were apart, and that was too much. So he really needs a climber to where you can fine tune that. But so definitely taking small swings instead of a big swing is good.
well, it's that whole suspension back there is so complex that small adjustments will make things feel different. So that would be my suggestion. And if I was only going to make one thing, or either that, or I would put either some static lead or static trail in the car, depending on what the car needs. That's about the first 2 that I would go for. Russ has got a question. He says he hears people talking about caster gain, and I hear people talk about anti-dive. Aren't they really the same thing, or at least accomplish the same way? Actually, no, they really don't. You could have no anti-dive with the A-frame setting at an angle and have quite a bit of caster gain depending on the angle of the way the upper A-frame is mounted on the frame. The caster, or the anti-dive, is more where the front of the A-frame is substantially higher than the back of the A-frame, because you could have like an A-frame that's straight across, like most of the late model guys run, and change the anti-dive in it, and it would not really actually increase or decrease the caster gain. So they're kind of 2 different things. It looks like they work the same way, but they are 2 different things. Now, if you do put a whole bunch of anti-dive in it, it's going to increase your caster gain probably slightly, but it's going to have much more of an effect on the anti-dive, and that's really what you're actually trying to accomplish there. So that's kind of my opinion of that. Yeah, that Panhard bar deal, like I said, when before, when you had to move it, make it 1.25 inch adjustment, I'd probably much change the engine before I changed the Panhard bar. I mean, it was like, oh my God, that's such a huge adjustment. Yeah. And now with the climber gears and the way they work, and like with your pinion plate, the way it works, you can drop it down there and you can see if how far you actually dropped it. Put that in your notebook, the same notebook you got all your load stick information in. Next time you go back to that racetrack, you've got a good idea. So, any other questions? We've got, like I said,
You got Josh Pfeiffer there. You see that one? You skipped over Josh.
I did. Sorry, Josh. I wasn't meaning to. Well, I think we skipped over a few. Just a second. I'm looking for it. Well, there's Joe. That's a different one. We didn't answer that one. Joe's got a question while I look for Josh's question. Joe's got a question. What's the best, easiest way to get more acumen in the right front when counter steering? Well, of course, it depends on your rules. By adjusting Ackerman on one tire or one corner of the car, like with the right front, you almost got to change the length of the steering arm in comparison to the length of the steering arm on the left side. Now, if you're running like under the IMCA sanctioning, they will frown on that. They're not going to like that very well. Now, if you're very creative, of course, you can weld holes shut, and you can maybe do a little on the left side and a little on the right side, and you keep dirt on top of those things or something like that. Everybody's creative, but once again, you got to check your rules to make sure that that's something you could do. Richard's got a question. He says, y'all been talking about all of the adjustments and hundreds of things you can do to change with a 4-link car. With that said, do you think a 3-link car is easier to make work? And if so, will it be as competitive as a 4-link car? Well, that's quite the question, because there's advantages and disadvantages to both. The downside to the 3-link car or the upside to a 4-link car, you can have more impact on roll steer with the adjustments that you can do, where with the 3-link car, it's a little bit more difficult because in my opinion, and once again, this is strictly in my opinion, the 3-link car, the two lower rods have the same impact on a car as the two upper rods do on a 4-link car. And your two lower rods on a 4-link car have more impact on the steer. Now, granted, there's more to it than that, but generally that's kind of speaking. So the 4-link car isn't as complicated as sometimes we make it believe, because if you'll watch a lot of the guys that run really good, they don't, once they get their center package that they like to work around, they don't change a tremendous amount. You might actually see them change a right front spring more than you will see them change pretty much anything in the back of the car. So I think people can get overcomplicated in their mind about that, but they're really not. There's enough information out there that you can get a good baseline and just deviate a little bit from that. JD's got a question. He's running a Harris this weekend. Would you recommend running the brake floater or not? Or is that just a preference thing, pro and cons on a modified? I'll let you do that one, Chad. You got.
Well, the brake floaters are way more common than not on a pull bar car, mainly because when you're clamped to the axle housing and you apply the brake pedal, it decells the pull rod and shears the traction on entry so it can free the car. And the brake floaters tend to transfer the energy up to the frame to get the car in the right front and get the car up and into motion. So it's kind of a balancing act. There's some guys that are really fast with the brake on the axle tube, but about 98% of the people are on a brake floater, I would say.
Yeah, and the thing is, once again, it kind of depends on the racetrack. I mean, some racetracks are more conducive to the brake floater and some are not. Some of your racetracks that are real tight cornered racetracks, maybe running without the brake floater might be an advantage. Running without the brake floater, you can kind of trail brake it a little bit more and get the car up on the bar more, like on a restart. But overall, the majority, everybody is running the brake floater, like Chad said. And if you're running something with a lot of momentum, the brake floater is really good. Russ has got some more questions on the 4-link. What's a good starting point on the birdcage 4-bar car? Is there a specific inch from the center line to the bar mounting points, 6 inches on the upper and 4 inches on the lower? What I actually do is 4.5 and 4.5. So my total center ends up being 9 inches. Now, sometimes on the left upper, we will drop that down to like Chad's hole number for his 4-inch hole, just to speed the reaction time up a little bit on the left upper. But for the most part, That's about the only thing we actually changed. We run it with that 9-inch center pretty mostly.
Yeah, that's kind of standard starting spot across the board, pretty much. 4.5 up, 4.5 down.
And I've seen guys on the right lower raise it up on the cage. That definitely will tighten the car up. You got to be a little careful there where it doesn't tighten the car up too much, but it can affect it too. Dale's got a question. What are the effects of running a 16-inch left rear spring and a 13-inch right rear spring on a stock car? Well, in my opinion, the 13-inch spring and the 16-inch spring, when you're running a 16-inch spring, you can actually run a little bit softer rate, compress the spring a little bit more. So when the car goes into the corner, it will try to roll the car up on the right front a little bit more. I like that quite a bit. Also, when you run that 16-inch spring, you have the you can affect the spring table a little bit. That shorter spring on the right side, the car is going to want to roll over it a little easier than if it had an equal length spring to the left side. So I think it's a benefit. That's what we run on our modifieds, and all the stock car guys that we deal with run a 16-inch on the left and a 13-inch on the right. Jerry, Bob, just wanted to say thanks for your RTI video program you have. From the lack of knowledge or not paying close enough attention to the instructions, I had the lower plates on my zero index backwards, where those zero index holes were on the back side instead of the front. By watching your video, I figured out what I had done wrong. Would you recommend the RTI program to anyone out there? Well, I appreciate that, Jerry, because that program, like I said, it's a great program. Whether we've got the program for the stock cars, we've got the programs for the sport mods, we've got the programs for the modifieds. Plus the fact that all of the guest speakers, like Chad, Chad was at the 4-link one. We've had a lot of great speakers that offer a lot of knowledge. Paul Berger, one of the experts in the stock car one. It's basically it's the 2-day class, and you can buy that online or you can do it on a DVD program. But and that was kind of the question I was, when we were talking a little bit earlier, and the guy was talking about the load stick. We went through that load stick in the class and talked a lot about it, run a car through the motions, showed exactly how it worked. And just for that, it would be well worth it. And like I said, it's basically 16 hours of education from the best in the industry, in my opinion. And I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm talking about the guys that are helping me. Austin's got a question. On a 3-link with 5-degree split rule, what's the best way to increase forward drive while leaving the front of the car down? By that, I mean not increasing right front spring or decreasing rebound on the right front.
Forward drive is bar angle, right?
Yeah, but see, this is a Wasota question. When you can only have the 3 degrees between the two of them, in my opinion, what I would actually probably do is I would run more like in the 15-degree to 20-degree range on the left rear, and maybe more on the right rear. And the thing you can do when you run a lot of, people sometimes forget about if we flatten the right rear out, it gets more drive. And I agree with that, but we're also taking drive out of the left rear. So one of the things that I've recommended to customers is, running a little bit more angle and running more load in the left rear, a little bit more left rear drive. Seems to help those cars. The other thing, I'm not thinking of it right now, so I might pop back to this question, Austin. Increasing the rear percentage definitely would help, but you got to be a little. And when you increase the left rear percentage, you got to be a little careful not to get too far back. You want to try to just keep the weight, in front of the fuel cell, still over top of the axle. Kevin's on here. Congratulations, Kevin, on your big win here a week ago, a heat race and a feature. We were all cheering for you, and I can't believe that your son probably wasn't just happy as all could be. On a track with more banking and the surface has more grip, right front shears to the fence between phases 2 and 3. Would it be because by the right front over traveling, or would it be the rear tire be overpowering the front? Well, when you're losing the front end, it could be the front end's maybe just a skosh stiff. But when you're talking between phase 2 and phase 3, a lot of times you might just need to put more steer in the car. The left rear is probably overpowering the right front. Or the other thing that you could do, because we've got one brand of car that we work with that needs to have a pretty aggressive hold down shock on the right front, because they have so much traction, and to get them things to get those cars to turn like we want them to, we've had to increase rebound on the right front, and that's a possibility too, that would help it, because that's where the car that I was working with and the customer, that's where he was having problems, and so we just upped the rebound side of the shock and seemed to have that. It helped that car quite a bit. Jeff's got a question. What can I do to get an IMCA modified not to 3-wheel with J-bar a half an inch above the center, already stiffer right rear maybe? Well, you could go stiffer right rear. Odds are, and I found this time and time again, that your rear end is too far to the left. When you get that right rear stuck underneath the car, and like say this would be a prime example, say you had a 4-inch wheel and you stick that on the rear, what you're doing now is you're moving that left rear or that right rear tire closer to the center of gravity, so it's going to be a lot easier for everything to roll on that tire. And so a lot of times I've seen guys that have done this, and I tell them, I don't care your chassis builder's measurement, whatever it is, the way how you've got something set up, you need to move the rear end a 1/4 of an inch to the right, see if that helps it. Or you could, if you've got where you can run some spacer rules, try to move that right rear tire out with a 1/2 inch spacer. That would be an easy way to tell if that's, because what it is your right rear is getting stuck too hard, and that's what's causing the car to lift. I have seen, or Ben's got a question, I've seen some shock builders limit the shock travel on both right front shocks to the top out at ride height. What do you think would be the advantage or disadvantage of doing this? Well, we see that a lot. The advantage to that is by setting your right front shock travel at ride height. That's where your load stick now is going to come into play, because now all of a sudden we can take that softer spring, which helps us get into the corner better, and we can actually put a turn or two in that spring to make that spring feel stiffer. Now, if you've got a 450-pound spring, you're still going to have a 450-pound spring. If you crank it down 4 turns, you're still going to have a 450-pound spring, but you're changing your load. So you set your height. Now we're putting more load on that spring, and now all of a sudden you find out that, well, with my 450 with 3 turns of preload in it, my load's XYZ, and my race car seems to like that the best. Back to your notebook. Now we write this stuff all down, and that gives you the option to put more load on the right front spring without raising your ride heights. Thank you guys for doing these videos. Have been a great source for information. Thanks, Jacob. I really appreciate it. We put a lot into those videos, and we sure hope that people get a lot out of them because there's a lot of information in there. If your baseline right front spring, say, is a 550, what condition would you want to go up on rate or down on rate? Well, so we're going to take this. We got a 550. If the car is going into the corner, you're rolling down into the corner, and the car starts to turn down in, and then it gets tight. Well, if it feels like it's rolling on the right front and it gets tight, that's telling you that you could be a little stiffer. You put a little bit more preload on that, because what's making it tight is it's rolling on the right rear, and the right rear is gaining a bunch of side bite. Now you go down into the corner and the car starts to take its set, but the front end never actually grabs the traction. That's telling you that now we need to go to a 525, we need to go to a 550, because we need to get that car so that it rolls over on that right front and makes the car turn down in the corner, and then work with the side bite in a different way if we get too much side bite. So that's basically the conditions that you would do there. Austin's got a question. Does spacing out the left rear increase drive or just increase side bite? Actually, I think it does both. Because what it does is it takes static load off that tire, and that's where it's going to increase your side bite. But where it's going to increase your forward bite is now, if you string line your race car, so that you put a string line on the left front and you string line it in comparison to the left rear, what's going to happen there is, if we get those two tires lined up, then all of a sudden our drive tires are driving the front end in the direction they want to. So say your two rear tires, your left rear is following the left front, and your right rear is in an inch from the right front. That car's going to have good side bite. It's going to have pretty good traction. It's going to be pretty drivable. Now, let's say we move it even more to the left and we stick that right rear in even further. Say we change wheel offsets or whatever. Now, all of a sudden, the right rear is going to make that car very tight because it's got a lot of side bite. Now, if we want to loosen the car, we could move that left rear. Instead of moving the left rear to the left, we could move it to the right, and that's going to actually free the car up. Or move the rear tires to the right will actually free the car up. So Jeff just logged in. Jeff, congratulations on your feature win there at Corning. Any other questions that we've got? Oh, we've got.
Want to go back to the one you missed?
Maybe we could go back to the one I missed. We can't find it. Can you find it?
It was Josh Pfeiffer on the right rear bar on a sport mod, running the Wehrs 2-link cage. When the track slicks off and the track slows down, moving the right rear bar down on the chassis. Does moving it up on the cage help with tailing off a little? It seems that the cage adjustment makes twice the difference. That's correct. The cage, anytime you make an adjustment on the suspension cage, whether it's a 2-link car or 4-link car, it's twice as effective as the frame side.
Yeah, and that's the same thing with your Panhard bar. If you're doing it on the rear end compared to on the frame, same thing. In answer to your question, Josh, by raising it up on the cage, or on that bracket on the right side, it's definitely going to increase traction, because you're changing the leverage point of how everything works back there. And what we actually do then, we can change the leverage point to gain traction, but we can keep a little bit of angle in that right rear to keep some steer in it. So that's a pretty common adjustment that we move. In fact, I told a guy on the phone today, I said, just raise that thing up 2 holes, leave it there, And when you get to a race where the racetrack's got a lot of grip or whatever, just put more stagger in it or put some trail in it. And just don't be changing all these things, 6 things between the heat and the feature, because now we're not completely sure what happened. I said that is just an effective change we found, so just leave it where it's at. And go ahead.
Yeah, back to that one question about the 2-link car and traction. Working on a car a couple weeks ago at Fountain City where they had a short pull bar on that 2-link car, and I think he made it about 8 inches longer, and you couldn't believe the difference of carrying the traction down the straightaway and having overall more traction down the straightaway. So playing with bar links is also something that I like to do on that right rear. I don't know if you play with going longer, but also had him put a longer right trailing arm on just to slow that transition in the middle of the corner. So there's some small gains there with just moving an inch, 2 inches, and that kind of thing. So
yeah, and that stuff is definitely worth trying. I mean, it's definitely big adjustments, and that I'm glad you mentioned it on that upper link, the 3rd link, or the solid upper bar. There's a lot to be said in length of that bar, because what it does, you go a little bit longer, say you get into the 28-inch range compared to like a 24 or a 23 or whatever. It just makes the car so much smoother to drive, and it might not be as responsive right smack in the center of the corner, which most of the time these cars are too responsive there to begin with. It'll just make your car so much more drivable. It lets the car drive down the straightaway, and it keeps traction in it longer. Like on a big racetrack, I mean, a 30-inch link bar would be perfect because you've got the time to do it. John's got a question. What shocks are on Bobby Harris's golf cart? I see it outside some, and it's looking mean. If it was up to him, they would have been CSIs. But since it was up to me, they are Amazon. The thing don't really ride that freaking great to begin with. So I'm like, why spend a whole bunch of money on that? So they wouldn't be of much help to you there, Jonathan. Next question. That's it. Okay, Isaac. USRA B-Mod. Driver has no feel on the right rear tire. Went down on spring rate, shock rate, added lead over the right rear. Any thoughts on helping the car get over on the right rear harder? Well, this could be a possibility where you would use some different wheel offsets. Bring that right rear tire in a little bit closer. With the harder tire that they can run, a little bit of let up there would be good. When you went down on spring rate, you actually made it you made it feel less, because when you take spring rate out of the corner, what it does is it'll still get motion, but it doesn't transfer the load from the springs to the tire. You would be better off up on spring rate.
Probably one of the most common misconceptions is, I can't feel the right rear, so I'm going to soften the spring.
Right.
But what essentially you need to do is figure out mechanically how to get the load to transfer, and then have spring rate to drive the tire in a racetrack. So you might want to look at the spring table in that car too, to help that thing get on that right rear harder, but then you got to have the rate of the spring to drive the tire in the racetrack. Otherwise, you're going to overpower it, just like Bob said, and then it tails out.
And very true. Plus the actual location of that spring. If the spring's too far outboard, it's going to probably not have quite the feel that if it was just inboard just a little bit. Is going to make the car, have a more of a balanced roll to it. Christopher's got a question. Lead on the left rear axle on a 3-link B-Mod. Would putting it behind the rear axle help with the looseness in the condition the left rear axle way causes?
No, it's going to get the load no matter if it's on the front or the back.
Yeah, I don't see where that would actually have an effect one way or the other. I think it's going to get the load no matter what. I agree with Chad on that.
Putting weight on the axle on the left rear tends to, well, it increases load in that corner, and when there's more load in that corner, it makes the car loose in. That's one of the most common problems when we went with all that heavy stuff and we were building all the heavy components is you get that corner so hard when you're going in the corner that has that much more load and it overpowers the car and wants to make it turn or spin out. So if you just take weight and throw it on there, you need to rebalance your package based on what you're doing there to get the load advantage of having the lead on the axle.
Well, and also that's the thing, back to Christopher's question on that 3-link mod. That might be a deal, or I mean, not Chris, the question before that. Maybe if without the right rear field, maybe a little bit more dropping the J-bar on the rear end or dropping the painted bar on the rear end would probably definitely help that situation. Dave's got a question. With lighter springs in the rear of a stock car, would you lower tire pressure if you were running 11 pounds to put more heat in the left rear? We have a 16-inch 150 and a 13-inch 150. The car gets a little tight mid-corner. Left front's coming up. I wouldn't lower the air pressure. I would probably increase the air pressure if I was going to do anything in that situation. What's the best location for pull bar on the rear end, front of axle tube and center of axle tube, or pull from further back in the center? Well, there's different theories behind this too. My particular theory is putting it ahead of the axle tube. On our GRT stuff, it's 3 inches. The original thought behind that was when we were getting a lot of movement on the pull bar, we wanted to get it so that when the pull bar got to its full movement, that the rear end, where it was located on the rear end, didn't go past center. So what it would do is it would always increase angle and keep traction in it. Now, some people, and I've not had it work for me, but some people believe that behind the housing, what that actually does when it wraps up, it takes angle out, which when you have angle out, it's definitely going to give you more straightaway speed or more traction down the straightaway. But the majority of the cars, I know the Rage cars that way, the Skyrocket cars that way, are slightly ahead of center. And that seems to work pretty well. Richard, y'all keep mentioning spring table. Could you explain? You got your piece of paper with you tonight, Chad? Could you explain? And there's a starting point. All right. Chad's going to show us this.
This is my handy spring table drawing. So spring table essentially is the distance from the ground to where the springs are located. So on a coilover, it would be just like this, wherever that either the shock or the slider hooks up on the chassis. So if you're at ride height and you measure from the ground up to that mounting point, and they're the same on both sides, let's just call it 28 inches, that would be neutral. If the right rear is higher, it's going to not roll over as easy. So it's almost like if you just think about a teeter-totter, and if you have the teeter-totter starting in a position like that, it's going to not want to fall over. If the teeter-totter starts like that, it's going to want to fall over real easy. So it's not as difficult as you would think. It's easy on a coilover. On a spring where you have a screw jack car, then you have to measure where the screw jack tip is. So if you have a cup where the screw jack goes lower into the cup, then you need to measure to that point. If you have another different cup where it's higher, then you would measure to that point. If you have a 16-inch spring versus a 13-inch spring, that's an automatic 3-inch difference. But that's not at your static height, so it would be at what it is scaled. So if you have a 16-inch and a 13-inch, if they're in the car and they're only a 2 1/4 difference, that'd be a 2 1/4 spring table difference. So,
correct.
So it's After you're scaled and you're sitting there at ride height, the simple ground up measurement will give you that number. And if the right rear is higher, the car is going to resist roll. If the right rear is lower, the car is going to roll easier.
Yep, that's exactly right. Nice picture there, and I'm glad you bring it with you.
I'm getting real good at spring table description.
Yeah,
that's been one of my specialties lately. I should put that in CAD, and
I think you should. Yeah,
we're going to put that in the manual next year for the.
Well, we've talked about putting in the manual for the last 3 years.
Well, I've been a little behind.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, the help you get nowadays. Daryl's got a question on a USRA B mod running a shock on the right front on the right rear in front of the axle tube. What will that do? Well, it kind of depends, or left rear. When you're running a shock in front of the housing on the left rear, you kind of remember with a 3-link suspension, even if you've got a solid upper bar with the steer that these cars in, the left rear is always going to try to go forward and push up. The right rear is always going to try to go backwards and push down if you have the spring behind or the shock behind. So we always recommend going in front on the left rear because you're always working into the shock. When you put it behind on the right rear, the disadvantage to that is sometimes you're working, the car's coming down, it's compressing, but your rear end's wrapping up away from it. So there's kind of 2 separate motions, and I don't think it's the most effective use of the shock absorber. However, it will create more traction. I've seen that time and time again, even on a solid upper link, just because of the way the car steers in there, it definitely does. Richard, what's a good starting point for a spring table, Chad?
Well, I would probably start neutral. I would try and get them the same height. Most of the cars that are a screwjack car are going to be lower on the right automatically just because of the different spring heights. On a 4-link car, I'd probably start equal or a little bit lower, 1 to 2 inches lower on the right rear. And if you get to a speedway that's slow and slick and you want to tip over more, I would lower the right rear more. Big, fast momentum racetrack, you probably want to have it more even. And I would just tune accordingly.
Well, you really do have this spring table thing down pat.
One of my favorites, man.
This is good. Dang. Well, retirement's going to be seeing me here one of these days. What does a left front chain limiter do? When does it get shortened? Well, what the left front chain limiter does is it actually will take when you choke the chain down, it takes movement out of the left front. When the left front transfers weight to the right rear, it limits that transfer. Well, it can't stop weight from transferring, so automatically it will go to the left rear. When you shorten the chain up is when you've got adequate side bite, but you need more forward drive. Shortening that chain up will definitely give you more traction up off the corner. Say, for example, you're in a racetrack where traction's not so bad, but you really got to keep the car kind of snug getting in, and you don't want to do panhard bar and all this other stuff. You just want a small change that you could make. You could lengthen that chain limiter on the left front, and it will give you a little bit more side bite on the right rear. Now, keep in mind, when you do that, there is a chance you will take a little bit of traction away from it, but we do it all the time. I'm a firm believer in choking that left front down, and it makes the car come off the corner really well. Bob, with the soft left rear springs, are you scaling them with the spring, or are you scaling them with the stiffer left rear and then just setting preload on a soft spring? Well, Brian, that's exactly what I tell our guys. Get yourself an old slider, put one of your old 200-pound springs in there, and that unit is going to strictly be for scaling purposes. You're never going to run it. Never has to go in your trailer unless you're going on the road, because that's the only time you're going to use that is to scale it. So I scale the car with my pair of 200s, or my 200 left rear and my 225 right rear, and my regular front springs just exactly where it is. So I got my ride heights where I want it to be. Everything is exactly where I want it. And then I take it off the scales. I have my 100-pound spring that I've got 2.5 inches of load in it and bolted on the car. Only thing that I check after I bolt it on the car is to make sure my right rear or my left rear quarter panel body measurement doesn't go over the measurement, so that the tech guy gets all confused when he reads his tape measure. And in fact, I actually took a picture. I seen it on Facebook the other day, but it's on my computer at home. I got to remember to bring that next week. Where a guy had fixed this problem. He had actually taken the tape measure apart and he lengthened the tape measure down by the 1 inch mark to like 1.5 inches. And he says, when those tech inspectors, I go, well, your tape measure is just wrong. Use mine. So his tape measures actually gives him an extra 0.5 inch. I'm thinking, pretty creative, but it was pretty easy to see. Some people have a lot of time on their hands.
I'm not going to say anything.
Oh boy. But anyway, I had to chuckle about that. You can see anything on the internet. I mean, Facebook, oh, you got it. All right, we are close to ending the day. Once again, don't forget about the RTI Knowledge Center. Our videos are available online at racetechinfo.com. And Chad's got all kinds of things. If you guys got some questions, we got all kinds of products and stuff. Feel free to look through his website. And we've got one last question here. Jerry wants to know, Chad, I got the right front cup to lower the spring table in the right front. Have to order the screw jack to go with it. Is there a spring cup you recommend for the left front?
Just a standard top bearing. So either the one with a tall extension or a short extension. Just a standard bearing on top of the cup. Yep.
Well, I think that sounds really good. You guys have been a great audience tonight. Next week, we're going to, oh yeah, and I wanted to remind everybody once again, I don't know if I mentioned anything about the Harris Clash coming up, but if I forgot that, don't forget about the Harris Clash coming up. For those of you who are out in Pennsylvania and all those places that you want to watch an excellent race, it's going to be on, the Harris Clash will be on IMCA TV that night. And the other thing, my daughter, who keeps track of how good all you guys do, she mentioned that I need to remind you that she can't keep track of your information if you don't get it to her. So let's make sure and humor her and make sure she gets all the information. She came up to me today and she says, did you know that so-and-so has 11 feature wins this year? And I said, I had no idea. Well, he went to the school. We need to know about this. I'll mention it tonight on the broadcast. Next week, we're going to have a track promoter, Colt Queensland, who is the track promoter for the Deer Creek Speedway. He will be our special guest. We're going to get the insight of, we've had chassis builders, we've had shock builders, we've had all kinds of different guests. We're going to have our first promoter, race promoter, and get their perspective of the sport. Awesome. So once again, thanks guys for tuning in. You guys have a great week and be safe.
Thank you.